Economic bubbles, also known as speculative bubbles or financial bubbles, occur when the price of an asset goes up very quickly in market value. But what triggers the bubble? And are we in one today? History has shown us that a variety of factors like novelty, scarcity, optimism, and easy access to money can combine to form speculative bubbles. What triggers one bubble may be different from the next, but the phenomenon is rooted in the same basic causes. As author Mark Twain once said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. I'm Chris Kovalchuk, Associate Portfolio Manager at Claret, and in this video, I will be comparing 3 of the most spectacular economic bubbles in history. I'll also provide you with some tips to help you avoid having to guess when the next one will occur. Tulip Mania is one of the most famous speculative bubbles, and people believe it was one of the first bubbles in history. Tulips were introduced to Holland, with the bubble occurring mainly between 1634 and 1637. Due to their bright and varied colors, tulips were highly prized and a sign of success among the wealthy. Then, the mania spread to all other social classes. Generally speaking, the more colorful and rare a bulb was, the greater its value. The most expensive varieties of tulips were called flame tulips because of their dark line patterns. This variety was supremely coveted. Unfortunately, their beauty was not due to genetics, but instead was a result of a virus infecting the flower, which produced the spectacular colors. This meant that it was impossible to reproduce the stunning tulips by replanting them using traditional methods, ramping up demand. At the height of the mania, the rarest bulbs were selling for up to 6 times the average annual salary at the time. Compare that to the average $50,000 salary of Quebec today. That would be the equivalent to a $300,000 tulip. Merchants who wanted to profit off this madness went so far as to create a secondary futures market so that people could buy and sell tulip bulbs without ever actually owning them. The tulip craze ended badly when for the first time a tulip auction did not attract enough buyers, causing total panic. The bubble burst in 1637, leaving many people ruined. These people had mortgaged their house, their land, and their life savings to buy a few tulip bulbs. The crash of 1929 is one of the most significant events in history. It took place at the end of a period called the Roaring Twenties, from 1920 to 1929 in the United States, and was followed by the Great Depression. The end of World War I and the availability of credit in the 1920s allowed for the sale of more consumer goods. Big ticket items like automobiles became attainable for the middle class. People who could not afford a car could now pay for it over time, with interest of course. However, people also started buying stocks on credit. And as the stock market rose, they took advantage of buying on margin, an option provided by their brokers, which was a novelty at the time. Borrowing up to 95% of the value of a purchase was permitted at the time. The most popular sectors were the new technologies, such as cars, aeronautics, and radio. For instance, radio company stocks skyrocketed, rising 400% in 1928 alone. Speculation was rampant, and people believed the stock market would only continue to rise. In March 1929, the Federal Reserve warned of excessive speculation, leading to the first crash. People sold off their stocks in a mad rush, exposing the market's fragile foundation. A few days later, one of the most affluent bankers of the day, Charles Mitchell of National City Bank, announced that he would provide $25 million in support to stop the market from falling. His firm and several others began to buy shares to stop the slide. It was the beginning of the end. The epic boom period ended in a monumental crash that began on Monday, October 28, 1929, when the Dow dropped nearly 13%. The very next day, on Tuesday, October 29, 1929, now infamously known as Black Tuesday, the Dow dropped nearly 12%. Within a few short weeks, the Dow had shed nearly half of its value. The downward march continued until it bottomed out in the summer of 1932, when the Dow closed at 41 points, its lowest level in the 20th century, 89% below its peak. The Dow did not return to its pre-crash high until November 1954. The late 90s saw a massive growth in internet use and adoption. Futuristic companies were being created and given outrageous valuations. Some only needed to announce that a lot of people were clicking on their website, or claim that a lot of people would visit their website in the future. Were these companies profitable? No. But who cared? Fast forward to 1999. A financial crisis was brewing, triggered by the Russia default on its debt, and putting the entire US banking system in trouble. The Federal Reserve then decided to lower interest rates to extremely low levels and began printing money. Another problem was rearing its ugly head, Y2K, short for year 2000. At the dawn of the new millennium, people feared computer systems would stop working as old computers were forced to contend with 3 digits instead of 2. The world spent between 400 and 600 billion rushing to fix the bug before the clock struck midnight. Much of this money ended up in the hands of these tech companies, which inflated their valuations even more. Wall Street analysts were predicting that these companies would continue to grow at the same rate after Y2K. Meanwhile, the Fed began raising interest rates to counter inflation. Finally, the market peaked in March 2000, bringing the whole thing crashing down. Many companies like Nortel went under. Others, like Amazon, eventually bounced back in spectacular fashion, but only after a wild roller coaster ride. In 1999, Amazon's stock went from being $100 per share to less than $6 per share, all within a year. Even though today the stock is worth much more than it was back then, it went from $100 to less than $6 in a year. The Nasdaq lost more than 75% of its value in 2.5 years, and only recovered to its peak in 2015, 13 years later. One question we are often asked is, are we in a bubble? That's a tough question to answer. In hindsight, we know why these infamous bubbles happened. But bubbles are hard to predict by nature, especially if you're currently in one. Here are some tips to help bubble-proof your finances. Be cautious, but stay invested. Remain methodical and disciplined in your choice of securities. Ensure proper diversification and beware the sirens call, which is what you hear on social media, the flashing news headlines, or your uncle at Christmas dinner. You may miss a few home runs here and there, but if you follow this approach over a long period of time, you will certainly avoid the biggest risks for the next bubble. If you enjoyed watching this video, please feel free to share it with a friend or a colleague or a family member who might like it too. For more investment tips, visit our website at claret.ca and don't forget to click the subscribe button.